Hi, Isaac. Welcome to the Leanpub launch video for the Incredible Story of Deft. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, the book, and how it came about and who it's for.
Hi, Len. So I'm an engineer by training, but I have also spent quite some years in product development and processes, how you do operations improvement, and so on. The book is a distillation of this experience, and to some degree, I would say it's a farewell to that kind of work too, because I've been in corporate environments where different flavors of Deft, as I call it, have been practiced, and after many years of practicing hopefully the good parts of the various Deft types, I somehow saw through what was happening. And what's happening is what's being described in this book.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, the book came about, as you tell at the beginning, through a sort of a very popular LinkedIn post that you wrote as a kind of brain dump. And so, being explicit about it, Deft is a kind of satirical play on Agile and things like that. And the way those sort of frameworks or manifestos or approaches kind of change and morph over time and become somewhat wasteful exercises.
Exactly. So in fact, it's exactly what you called it. First of all, it's satire. Everything is fictional. It is, however, heavily inspired by actual experience, and not only from my experience, but also from friends, from other people I've worked with in other companies. So the characters in there are deliberately written to be realistic, somewhat unlikable at the beginning, but also written to show how easy it is for people who are otherwise capable, skilled, intelligent, and actually very thoughtful to fall in the traps of Deft. And you called it out. I mean, it's about Lean, it's about Agile, it's about Six Sigma, it's about, I don't know, Scrum, and then you can start adding, right? DevOps, design thinking, business model canvas, everything that somehow catches on fire in companies, and suddenly everybody's doing it, everybody's talking about it, and actually they do rituals. They hire consultants who tell them how to do the rituals. They go through, I don't know, canvases or methods or tools, but also doing this a bit of as a theater, ignoring what the end goal is. That's basically Deft, and that plus the cottage industries that always arise around those topics. Consultancy, certifications is one of my favorite topics, and how everybody gets caught up. And I don't know if you've heard out how, and maybe you've seen in the recent months, or basically the same in the last 2 years on LinkedIn, Agile, which used to be super hot, and even I fell for it for maybe 2 or 3 years. It started to become questioned, and people finally are saying, maybe we believe too much in it, and people are dumping on a safe Agile or Scrum, and the people are being more open to questioning what many people have made a living out of for the past maybe 10 years. It's actually a disillusionment that has happened. That's not necessarily bad. Hopefully this book is a vaccine in a way, an inoculation for the next Deft, because I can guarantee it, the next Deft is already on the works.
Yeah, no, that's so well said, and it's interesting. What a kind of it's a satire, but it's also a kind of tragedy. The story, because I mean, I can say, for example, working, I've never actually been sort of subject or part of Agile or Scrum sort of methods myself at a company, but I've interviewed at least 2 people on the Agile Manifesto signatories who've written books on Leanpub, and one of the co-founders of Scrum. And the origins of these things are incredibly well-intentioned and kind of, big moments when they happen, right? Because, for example, in the world of software, before Agile, you had huge teams of people who would write out every single instruction for the programmers. And then the programmers were conceived as these bricklayers who were just going to be these menial task doers, because the desire was to have them be menial task doers. And then people realized you can't build software that way. People think they're being serious when they do it, and it doesn't work. But then it turns into what it was meant to fight.
Yes, it's like the meme that you become the very thing that you claim to destroy, to get rid of. And clearly nowadays software is German saying alle Munde, in everyone's mouth. It's a world that has been eaten by software. But it's not only about software. As a mechanical engineer, when I was studying, I was exposed to what is now called phase gate, stage gate. So the typical, You gather data, you present some case at a gate meeting, the decision is being made to proceed. And it is you de-risk the project. That was before Agile. And then suddenly we said, oh, this is slow. And it is slow in some ways, and it does explode risk if you don't do it properly. But then we swung all the way over to Agile. It's like total autonomy. Everybody does no process, no documentation, whatever. I mean, I don't remember the manifesto, but it is a you have action and reaction. You have the pendulum of discourse swinging one way, and then you have it swinging the other way, as if it will revolutionize the world. And then people get wind of it, and then they start to add their own, practical elements, and they water it down, and then they start debating whether the old approach was bad or good, and then typically you demonize the past approach. And I actually have done this. I have articles on LinkedIn where I've demonized the phase gate, and it deserves to be demonized to some extent, but it's very easy to fall into this mindset where everything that we used to do was bad, and now we need to do everything in a new way. And it does disservice to people too, because you need to understand the principles behind different approaches, and then depending on the situation, pick and make what works for you. And yes, the book is a satire, and the book is actually the second edition of something I wrote back in 2017, which was very, like when I wrote the article, then I made a book that I published on a different platform. It was a print-on-demand book. And I remember struggling a lot to make it not only this sarcastic thing dripping with, venom of disappointment, disillusionment, because I was going through that phase. I struggled a lot back then to make it, to have a positive ending, to say, yes, okay, and so what? Like just deconstructing something, like saying Agile is bad or Lean is bad, which is also not what the book is saying, but it can come across like this. It's not helping anyone. I mean, it's just, it's not the way I am, but I went through that phase. And so in this version, the one you find on Leanpub, first of all, it changed a lot. So their characters, they interact, as I said earlier, and you also see their thought process. And you also see how they fall into the traps and how they try to help each other to get unstuck and slowly realize what they've been subjected to. And the book's ending is way more helpful than what it used to be in the first edition. The idea is when you read that book, you don't only smirk and say, oh, I'm so clever now. I know, and now I'm wiser. Yes, okay, you're wiser, but the thing is, how do you move? What do you do now? Because probably you cannot go to your company and say, we stopped doing Agile. We don't use Lean. We don't use whatever Toyota, blah, blah, blah. Okay, but you have to still live within a kind of organization. And when the next Deft comes, that is, you are able to look through the smoke and mirrors of what is being sold and either add your insights or, and I'm being very upfront with it, is sometimes you cannot actually bend the system to your will, or you cannot make it work honestly. And it's not a bad thing to know that you're being played and to voluntarily depart from the system, like subtract yourself from the theater. Totally valid too.
Yeah, it's interesting. This is a theme in your writing. Previous video we recorded for one of your books about the cave, smoke and mirrors and things like that. And I really like the idea of like facing up to it, right? Like you go through the phase of perhaps falling for something, then you go through the phase of angry reaction, and then hopefully you go through the phase of this is the world we live in. Smoke and mirrors are a feature of it. I remember one of my first job in London, I was doing mergers and acquisitions research in 1999, the burgeoning of the web and stuff like that. And it was in the days of when .com meant something. And here's how you launched a company and made $1 million. You got a website with .com at the end. You hired a very famous consulting company to do a report on you with a very recognized brand name, and then you did basically a kind of like, you issued some shares in an IPO with that brand name of that very famous consulting company associated with it, and then that was a signal to gamblers in the stock market that it's likely other gamblers would pump this thing for a while, even for a long time. And then you could, and here's the thing, you could actually make a lot of money that way.
Absolutely.
And like you wouldn't, that if you were naive and you thought that the stock market was about long-term investments, you were in trouble. If you thought that stock market investment values were, reflections of the actual value of the company, and you were naive like that, you were in big trouble in the long term. But if you were a short-term gambler and you knew what the sort of that it was smoke and mirrors and a game, you could make a lot of money. And I just bring this up as a personal experience of like realizing, like, my realization that there was smoke and mirrors going on didn't make smoke and mirrors go away, and wasn't going to make smoke and mirrors go away. But like facing up to this, and the very kind of charitable way you ended up telling your story of seeing this thing, the characters represent different perspectives and ways of engaging with this thing, and how we can then live with the fact of the matter going forward.
Right. That's their motivation. It's very easy. People who know me from LinkedIn, many of my connections, because I was doing a lot of marketing on LinkedIn and I was fighting incumbents to get people out of their cave and so on. And many people on LinkedIn, they know me as being provocative, as being a bit snarky. And but in reality, sometimes it's not always, but sometimes it's a way to get eyeballs to make an actually, I believe, thoughtful argument. And I think it's very okay. If you are fooled into investing your money, you might destroy a livelihood. But what is happening with those methods, unfortunately, is that many people have bet their entire livelihoods, not just money, they have bet time. And time is very difficult to make up. And that's actually a tragedy, because you see people who have reduced their entire being to a certification they got in whatever method is in vogue in the past 7 years. And I'm not talking badly about, it's not that you can have your arguments. There are people who are dumping on Six Sigma, deservedly, for example. There are people who are criticizing Lean for being a copycat of Toyota production system. There are people who dunk on Agile because they see that it's turned into something weird, which is true. And yes, all of them, they somehow get mutated into, sometimes you could also call them grifts. That's fine and well. That's all good and well. But the problem is, so many people reduce their entire professional existence over the previous years or decades to a certification, to a buzzword, to a set of buzzwords, a set of rituals. And I maybe I'm too empathetic, but it pains me because I have risked being that thing for 2 or 3 years. And I have seen people who have so much to offer, right? They have amazingly nuanced takes. And then the terms somehow get into their brains. They become, like puppets, like Agile sock puppets or Lean aficionados. And then suddenly every rationale about why this is good just goes away. It's good because it's Lean. It's good because Toyota does it. It's good because Six Sigma, Motorola, blah, blah, blah. Oh, it's good because design thinking and Ideal did it. It's unfortunate. That's really, I hope that people will avoid falling for the next trap through this. And at the same time, I hope that executives will learn it, because actually the motivation for doing this edition is a chief financial officer of a company in the US who wrote me and said, Isaac, do you have another copy? Because my copy is well worn out after all those years, because he gives it to everyone in his company when they join to protect them from that kind of BS. And that's actually how I wrote this edition. That's why this person wrote the foreword. And I hope that this can serve as a wake-up call. It's a bit too much. As I said, as an inoculation. People hopefully will understand when the next thing comes up to be a bit more critical, a bit more skeptical. So it's a bit of a critical thinking. It focuses on this book focuses on the facts and on how business hype grabs hold of companies, organizations, people, and everything goes aflame. And there's another book which we can talk about another time, which is more about the personal experience of someone going through this. So this is more about the organization and the industry around it, around Deft. And there are other views you can take about what kind of an impact this can have on someone who really, really makes Deft, X, whatever you call it, into their whole reason of existence professionally. I'm fascinated by those topics. I think it's part of human experience. It doesn't need to be Deft. It can be, it can be crypto, it can be anything. It can be a political party, it can be anything. I think it's important to somehow make people sensitive to, as you said, smoke and mirrors will always be there. But if we try to see how we can recognize them early. They will always be there, but maybe we're not going to be one more of the victims. And this is what the book aims to become for organizations and for executives.
Yeah, well, it's a really great example of the genre. It does really good work for that, and as you say, it applies widely. It's not just one or two things that start in a good-natured and intentioned and even revolutionary way, and then once they're named, they turn into something else. But it's a great examination of that phenomenon. That's a phenomenon that's not going away, and I recommend it to anybody who's just interested in that part of the human experience and in sort of inoculating, as you say, their businesses against the way these things can happen. So thank you very much, Isaak, for taking the time out of your day to do this launch video for the Incredible Story of Deft.
Thank you.